What if the man who promised to love you tried to end your life instead? Grace Morrison thought she had it all. The perfect marriage, a beautiful home, and a baby on the way. But behind that luxury facade hid something dark, a millionaire husband and his mistress, plotting the unthinkable. When he kicked his pregnant wife to the ground, he thought no one would stop him, until her two brothers found out. What follows is not just revenge, it's justice served in the most chilling, satisfying way imaginable. Secrets, betrayal, and a payback so terrifying, it'll leave you breathless until the very last second. If you love stories of revenge, shocking twists, and ultimate justice, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay for more gripping tales just like this. Your next favorite story starts right here. The security footage timestamp read 11:47 p. Ocean View Medical Center in Santa Monica. The grainy black and white image showed a private hospital suite, sterile and expensive, the kind that cost $3,000 a night. Grace Morrison lay on the floor, 7 months pregnant, blood pooling beneath her hospital gown. Her hand reached toward the camera, fingers trembling. Her lips formed words the silent footage couldn't capture, but anyone watching could read them clearly. Please, my baby. Above her stood Marcus Sinclair, 38 years old, real estate developer, net worth $80 million. His Ferragamo loafer, worth $3,000, was still visible in the frame. The same shoe that had just kicked the hospital bed hard enough to send his pregnant wife crashing to the tile floor. Behind him, a woman with champagne-manicured nails held an iPhone, filming, not calling for help, not rushing to Grace's side, filming. And in the corner of the frame, if you look closely, you could see her smile. Natalie Ross, 29 years old, Marcus's executive assistant, his mistress, the woman who had been planning this moment for 5 years. The footage froze on Grace's face. Terror, pain, betrayal, all captured in perfect clarity. But this wasn't the beginning of the story. This was the moment everything changed, because Grace Morrison had two brothers, and they were about to teach Marcus Sinclair and his mistress what the word terrifying really meant. 72 hours earlier, Grace had still believed her marriage was real. The morning sun streamed through the windows of their $4.2 million mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. Grace stood in her art studio, paintbrush in hand, trying to capture the way light fell across the gardens. She was 32 years old, 7 months pregnant, and still believed she was the luckiest woman alive. Her husband Marcus had swept her off her feet 4 years ago at an art gallery opening in Manhattan. He was charming, successful, attentive. They married within 6 months. Grace gave up her career as an art curator because Marcus insisted she should relax, enjoy life, not worry about money. She didn't see the red flags, the way he checked her phone while she showered, the way her brother's calls and texts mysteriously disappeared, the way all their financial accounts were in his name only, the way he'd convinced her to sign a prenuptial agreement without reading it carefully. Grace thought she was building a life. She didn't realize she was walking into a trap. In his Manhattan office at Sinclair Properties, Marcus sat behind a glass desk, phone pressed to his ear. Natalie Ross lounged in the leather chair across from him, legs crossed, designer heels dangling from one foot. She doesn't suspect anything, Marcus said into the phone. After the baby comes, we file for divorce. The prenup gives her nothing. The trust fund becomes accessible through child support. $500,000. Plus the insurance payout when she has her inevitable breakdown. He hung up and smiled at Natalie. She crossed the office and kissed him. Not the gentle kiss of new lovers, the practiced kiss of partners in crime. When do we tell her? Natalie asked. Soon, Marcus said, once she's far enough along that she can't do anything about it. Pregnant women are so emotional, so unstable. The courts always side with the stable parent. Natalie smiled. You're a genius, baby. Marcus pulled her closer. We're a genius. This is our 4th run. We've got it down to a science. 400 miles away in Columbus, Ohio, Jake Morrison sat in his apartment, staring at his phone. 35 years old, ex-Marine, covered in tattoos, struggling with PTSD. He'd been trying to reach his baby sister for 2 weeks. Every call went to voicemail, every text unanswered. His brother Connor walked in. 38, homicide detective with Columbus PD, sharp eyes that missed nothing. Still can't reach Grace? Connor asked. Jake shook his head. Something's wrong. I can feel it. Marcus has always been controlling, Connor said carefully. But Grace chose him. We have to respect that. I don't respect any man who cuts a woman off from her family, Jake said. His jaw tightened. I should have stopped her from marrying him. Connor sat down. Remember what Dad used to say? Jake nodded. If someone hurts family, you don't just hurt them back. You end them. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Connor said. But both brothers knew. Someday it would. Grace stood in her doctor's office at 5 months pregnant, glowing with happiness. This was her first baby. She and Marcus had been trying for a year. Or so she thought. What she didn't know was that Marcus had been switching her birth control pills with placebos for 3 months. The pregnancy wasn't an accident. It was planned, calculated, because a baby meant leverage, custody battles, access to her $500,000 trust fund from her deceased parents. Marcus walked into the doctor's office with Natalie at his side. Grace, this is Natalie Ross, my new executive assistant, Marcus said smoothly. She handles my schedule. I thought she should be here to mark down all the important dates. Grace felt something twist in her stomach. Why would his assistant need to be at her prenatal appointment? But she smiled. She was always so polite, so trusting. Nice to meet you, Grace said. Natalie shook her hand. Her smile was perfect. Her eyes were calculating. Congratulations, Natalie said. Your first baby. How exciting. Do you have family nearby? My brothers are in Ohio, Grace said. They haven't visited in a while. Marcus's schedule is so busy, we haven't been able to coordinate. Marcus squeezed Grace's shoulder. Possessive, controlling. Grace thought it was affection. We'll make time soon, Marcus said, but his eyes told Natalie the truth. Never. After the appointment, Grace went home. Marcus and Natalie went to his penthouse apartment in Manhattan, the one Grace didn't know about. She's so naive, Natalie said, pouring wine. I almost feel bad. Don't, Marcus said. She's worth $500,000. Plus the real estate deal I'll close once I have the respectable family man image. This baby is worth $50 million in investor confidence. Natalie raised her glass. To Grace, the golden goose who thinks she found true love. They drank and laughed while Grace sat alone in Greenwich, painting a nursery mural, dreaming of the perfect family she thought she was building. But perfect families don't exist in houses built on lies. And Grace was about to learn that lesson in the most brutal way possible. At 6 months pregnant, Grace found the first crack in her perfect life. She was looking for Marcus's insurance card when she found his credit card statement in his study. Charges that made no sense. Tiffany's for $12,000. She'd received no jewelry. Hotels in Manhattan when Marcus claimed to be at conferences in Boston. Restaurants she'd never been to, wine that cost $800 a bottle. Grace's hands trembled as she scrolled through 3 months of statements. Tens of thousands of dollars she couldn't account for. She heard the front door open. Marcus was home early. Grace quickly put the statement back, her heart pounding. Should she confront him? Should she wait? Her therapist would say, communicate. Trust, don't jump to conclusions. But Grace had grown up with 2 older brothers who taught her to trust her instincts, and her instincts were screaming. That night at dinner, Grace watched Marcus carefully. He was charming as always, asking about her day, talking about work, planning a nursery furniture shopping trip. Everything seemed normal. Everything felt wrong. After dinner, Marcus went to his study to take a call. Grace cleaned up, then quietly walked toward the hallway. The study door was cracked open. She could hear Marcus's voice, low and intimate. I can't wait to get rid of her, Marcus said. Just a few more months. After the baby comes, she'll be too tired, too overwhelmed. The divorce will be quick. She'll be grateful for whatever I give her just to make it stop. Grace's blood went cold. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more. The prenup is airtight, so Marcus continued. She gets nothing. The house, the cars, the accounts, all in my name. She signed without reading it properly. And with the baby, I'll have access to her trust fund through child support arrangements. $500,000 that should have been hers. Soon it'll be mine. There was a pause. Then Marcus laughed. I know, right? She actually thinks I love her. God, she's so boring. But boring is exactly what I needed. The investors eat up the stable family man image. This baby is worth $50 million in deals. Grace's legs gave out. She slid down the wall, one hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound, the other cradling her pregnant belly. The person on the other end of the call said something. Marcus laughed again. Natalie, baby, you know you're the one I really want. Grace is just business, your pleasure. Once this is over, we'll have enough money to disappear. Maybe Europe, maybe the Caymans, somewhere warm where we can spend Grace's money in peace. Grace forced herself to stand, forced herself to walk back to the kitchen, forced herself to breathe. She needed to think, she needed to plan, she needed her brothers. She grabbed her phone and locked herself in the downstairs bathroom. Her hands shook as she pulled up Jake's contact. She hit call. The phone rang and rang, then went to voicemail. Grace tried Connor, same thing. Voicemail, she tried again and again. Nothing. It wasn't until later that night when Marcus was asleep and Grace was lying awake in the dark that she realized the truth. She went to her phone settings, looked at her blocked contacts list, saw 37 numbers she'd never blocked. All her brother's numbers, old and new. All her childhood friends, her college roommates, anyone who might question Marcus, anyone who might help her. Marcus had been systematically isolating her for 2 years, and she'd never noticed. Grace cried silently in the darkness, one hand on her belly, feeling her baby move. She'd walked into a trap, and now she was 7 months pregnant, financially dependent, legally unprotected, and completely alone. But what Grace didn't know was that her brothers had already sensed something was wrong, and they were coming for her. Jake sat in his apartment in Columbus at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep. He'd been a Marine for 8 years, served 2 tours in Afghanistan, came home with PTSD and nightmares. But what kept him awake tonight wasn't war. It was his sister. He picked up his phone and called Connor. You awake? Jake asked. Yeah, Connor said. Can't stop thinking about Grace. Something's wrong, Jake said. I can feel it. Connor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I've been doing some research on Marcus Sinclair. And? He's been married before. 3 times, actually. Jake sat up. Grace said she was his first wife. That's what she thinks, but I ran his name through the database. First wife, Jennifer Hayes, died in 2015, ruled suicide. Second wife, Rebecca Cole, currently in a psychiatric facility. Third wife, Melissa Grant, died in 2018 in a car accident. The silence on the line was heavy with implication. 3 wives, Jake said slowly. 1 suicide, 1 institutionalized, 1 dead in an accident. Could be coincidence, Connor said, but his tone said he didn't believe that for a second. Or Marcus Sinclair is a predator, Jake finished, and our sister is his 4th target. I'm booking a flight to Connecticut, Connor said. Tonight. I'm coming with you, Jake said. Jake, you can't afford. I don't give a damn about money. That's our baby sister. If he hurts her, if he so much as looks at her wrong, Connor cut him off. We do this smart. We're not vigilantes. We gather evidence, we build a case, we protect Grace legally. And if the legal way doesn't work, Connor's voice went cold, then we do what Dad taught us. We protect family, no matter what it takes. They booked flights for the next morning. Neither of them slept that night. They didn't know they were already too late to stop what was coming, but they were just in time to make Marcus Sinclair regret ever touching their sister. The next day, Grace went to her prenatal checkup. Everything was normal. The baby was healthy. Grace was healthy, physically at least. Emotionally, she was fracturing. She sat in the parking lot after the appointment, hands on the steering wheel, trying to decide what to do. Go home, go to the police, go to a hotel. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Grace Morrison? A woman's voice asked. Yes? My name is Rebecca Cole. I was married to Marcus Sinclair. I need to talk to you before it's too late. Grace's heart stopped. How did you get this number? I've been trying to reach you for months. He blocks calls, but I found a way through. Please, meet me. I need to warn you about what he's planning. I can't, Grace said. I don't know you. This could be... He's going to take your baby, Rebecca interrupted. He's going to make you think you're crazy. He's going to isolate you, break you down, and then he's going to take everything. Your money, your child, your sanity. I know because he did it to me. I barely survived. Please, Grace, don't let him do to you what he did to me. Grace's vision blurred with tears. Where are you? Riverside Psychiatric Institute. I've been here for 6 years. He put me here. And he'll put you here too if you don't run now. The call disconnected. Grace sat in her car, shaking. She tried to call back. The number didn't work. She drove home in a daze. When she walked into the mansion, Marcus was waiting in the foyer with Natalie, both of them smiling, both of them dressed for an event. There you are, Marcus said. We were about to call you. How was your appointment? Grace looked at her husband, really looked at him, saw the coldness behind the charm, the calculation behind the smile. Everything's fine, Grace lied. Good, Marcus said, because we need to talk. About the future, about arrangements after the baby comes. Arrangements? Grace repeated. Natalie stepped forward. Marcus and I think it's best if we're honest with you, Grace. We've been seeing each other for 2 years. We're in love, and we think it's time to stop pretending this marriage is real. Grace felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Marcus took Natalie's hand. The baby wasn't an accident, Grace. I planned it. I needed the family man image for my investors. But now the deals are signed. I don't need you anymore. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to agree to a quiet divorce. You'll sign over custody. I'll give you a small settlement. And everyone walks away happy. You planned the pregnancy? Grace whispered. I switched your birth control pills, Marcus said casually. Took 3 months, but it worked. And now we have what we need. Grace's hand went to her belly protectively. I'm not giving you my baby. Marcus's smile disappeared. You don't have a choice. Check your prenup. You have no rights, no money. No lawyer will take your case. And if you fight me, I'll bury you. I'll have you declared mentally unfit. I'll make sure you never see this child again. You can't do that, Grace said. Yes, I can, Marcus said. I've done it before. Ask Rebecca Cole. Oh, wait, you can't. She's too medicated to form coherent sentences. Grace backed toward the door. I'm leaving. Marcus moved faster than she expected. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. You're not going anywhere, he said. You're 7 months pregnant. Where would you go? To your brothers? The ones whose calls I've been blocking for 2 years? Good luck finding them. You're alone, Grace. You have no one. And the sooner you accept that, the easier this will be. Grace wrenched her arm free and ran. She made it to her car, peeled out of the driveway with Marcus shouting behind her. She drove aimlessly, tears streaming down her face. No destination in mind. Just away. Away from the mansion. Away from the man she'd trusted. Away from the life that had turned into a nightmare. Her phone rang. A Connecticut number she didn't recognize. She answered. Grace Morrison? Yes. This is Officer Patricia Santos with Greenwich Police Department. You need to come to the station. Your husband has filed a report that you are experiencing a mental health crisis. He says you're a danger to yourself and your unborn child. We need you to come in for evaluation. Grace's blood went cold. That's not true. He's lying. He threatened me. He told me he was going to take my baby. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but we need you to come to the station calmly. If you resist, we'll have to bring you in forcibly. And that won't look good in your husband's custody filing. Grace hung up. She pulled over on the side of the road, hyperventilating. He was already 3 steps ahead. Already building his case that she was unstable, she had one chance. One call before they tracked her down. She pulled up her phone's recent calls, found the blocked numbers list, started unblocking her brother's contacts. She called Jake. It rang and rang. Then, miracle of miracles, he answered. Grace, is that you? I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Jake, Grace sobbed. I need help. Marcus is going to take my baby. I don't have much time. He's called the police. He's saying I'm crazy. Jake, I'm so scared. Where are you? Jake's voice went hard and focused. Military mode. I don't know. Some road in Greenwich? I just ran. Stay on the line. Connor's here. We're tracking your phone. Don't move. Don't talk to police. Don't go back to that house. We're on our way. Do you understand me? You're coming? Grace's voice broke. Baby sister, we're already in the air. We land in 2 hours. Stay hidden. Stay safe. We're coming for you. Grace closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. But neither Grace nor her brothers knew the true scope of what they were walking into. Marcus Sinclair wasn't just a con man. Natalie Ross wasn't just a mistress. And the game they'd been playing had rules Grace couldn't even begin to understand. The next 72 hours would change everything. And it would all start with one violent moment in a hospital room, captured on camera for the world to see. Grace hid in a Starbucks bathroom for 3 hours, waiting for her brothers. When Jake and Connor finally arrived, she almost didn't recognize them at first. Jake looked harder than she remembered, his Marine bearing evident in every movement. Connor wore his detective's shield on his belt, his eyes scanning for threats. They found her in the corner booth, hunched over cold coffee, one hand protectively cradling her pregnant belly. Jake reached her first. He knelt beside her chair, his calloused hands gentle on her shoulders. Grace, Jesus, what did he do to you? Grace looked up at her big brother, and the dam finally broke. She told them everything. The fake pregnancy, the mistress, the threats, the police report Marcus filed claiming she was mentally unstable, the blocked phone calls, the financial control. The other wives, Connor recorded everything on his phone, his detective instincts taking over. We need to get you somewhere safe, then we build a case. There's no case, Grace said hopelessly. Marcus owns this town. He donated $5 million to the local hospital. The police chief plays golf with him. His lawyer is the best in the state. I signed a prenup that gives me nothing. He's going to take my baby and there's nothing I can do about it. Wrong, Jake said. He's going to try to take your baby. But he's about to learn that you've got two very pissed off brothers, and we don't play by his rules. They took Grace to a hotel in Stamford, 30 minutes away. Connor made calls trying to find a lawyer. Jake stayed with Grace, his presence solid and reassuring. But at 2 in the morning, Grace woke up with terrible cramps. Blood stained the hotel sheets. Jake, she gasped, something's wrong with the baby. They rushed her to Ocean View Medical Center, the closest hospital, the same hospital where Marcus had donated $5 million, the same hospital where Marcus Sinclair and Natalie Ross were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. Grace was admitted to a private suite. The doctor examined her. Placental irritation, probably stress-induced. We need to monitor you overnight. The baby should be fine, but we're not taking any chances. Jake and Connor stayed with her. They took turns sleeping in the uncomfortable visitor chairs. Grace lay in the hospital bed, IV in her arm, fetal monitor beeping steadily. At 11:30 p.m., Marcus received an alert. His credit card company flagged unusual activity. Grace's medical insurance was being used at Ocean View Medical Center. He smiled. Perfect. He called Natalie. She's at the hospital. Time to execute phase 2. Are you sure about this? Natalie asked. There will be witnesses. That's the point, Marcus said. Everyone needs to see how unstable she is, how aggressive, how she put the baby at risk by running away. By the time we're done, no judge will question giving me full custody. They arrived at the hospital at 11:45 p.m. Marcus in his $3,000 suit, fresh from a charity gala. Natalie in a designer cocktail dress, her phone ready in her manicured hand. They walked past the nurse's station. No one stopped them. Marcus Sinclair's name was on the building. He could go wherever he wanted. Grace was half asleep when the door burst open. She jolted awake, saw Marcus, saw Natalie. Her heart rate spiked. The fetal monitor started beeping faster. Jake was asleep in the chair. Connor had gone to get coffee. Marcus, Grace said, her voice hoarse. What are you doing here? Checking on my wife and child, Marcus said smoothly. I was worried when you disappeared. The police said you were having a mental health crisis. Get out, Grace said. Please, you're not supposed to be here. Natalie stepped forward, phone raised. Oh, this is perfect. Look how paranoid she is, recording this for the lawyers. Grace tried to reach the call button. Marcus was faster. He grabbed her wrist, yanked her hand away. Don't make a scene, Grace. You're embarrassing yourself. Jake woke up, saw Marcus's hand on Grace's wrist, was on his feet instantly. Get your hands off my sister. Marcus released Grace and turned to face Jake. You must be the brother, the violent one with PTSD. Grace told me all about you, how you can't hold a jaw, how you have anger issues. You're not helping her case. I'm going to give you 3 seconds to walk out of here, Jake said. His voice was deadly calm. This is my wife, my baby. You have no right. 1, Jake said. Natalie filmed everything. This is great. Threatening behavior. Physical intimidation. 2, Jake continued. Marcus smiled. What are you going to do? Hit me? In a hospital? With cameras everywhere? Please. Go ahead. Give me another reason to have you arrested. 3, Jake moved. Marcus flinched backward into the hospital bed. It shifted slightly. But Marcus saw an opportunity. He kicked the bed, hard, deliberately. Grace, trying to sit up, wasn't braced. The force sent her off balance. She fell, awkward and heavy with pregnancy, hitting the floor hard. The fetal monitor exploded in alarm. Blood immediately began pooling beneath Grace's hospital gown. Jake lunged for Marcus. Connor appeared in the doorway, assessed the situation in a second, and grabbed Jake before he could kill Marcus with his bare hands. Nurses rushed in. The doctor shouted orders. Grace lay on the cold tile floor, one hand on her belly, whispering, Please, 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 don't let me lose him. And Natalie filmed everything, standing in the corner, phone steady, a small smile on her face. Security arrived, but they didn't arrest Marcus. They didn't even question him. The head of security, a man named Harold, glanced at Marcus and gave him the slightest nod. Message received. Handled. Instead, they escorted Jake and Connor to the waiting room. You need to let the doctors work, Harold said. My sister was just assaulted, Connor said, flashing his badge. I'm a detective. I need to take statements from witnesses. You're from Ohio, Harold said, unimpressed. No jurisdiction here, and Mr. Sinclair says your brother became violent and caused Mrs. Sinclair to fall. We have it on camera. Connor's blood ran cold. Where's the footage? Harold smiled. Being reviewed by our legal team, which meant Marcus's lawyers would get to it first. In the emergency operating room, Grace was rushed into surgery. Emergency C-section. The baby was born at 30 weeks. 3 pounds, 2 ounces. Immediately transferred to NICU. Grace woke up in recovery, groggy from anesthesia. A nurse stood over her. Your baby is alive, the nurse said, but he's very premature. He'll need to stay in NICU for at least 2 months. Where are my brothers? Grace asked. They're in the waiting room, but Mrs. Sinclair, there are some people here who need to speak with you. 2 police officers entered. Behind them, Marcus and his lawyer. The lawyer stepped forward. Grace Morrison Sinclair, we're here to serve you with emergency custody papers. Due to your mental instability and the danger you posed to your unborn child by fleeing your home and causing tonight's incident, my client is seeking full custody with 0 visitation rights until you've undergone psychiatric evaluation and treatment. Grace tried to sit up. Couldn't. The pain was too intense. That's not what happened. He kicked the bed. He did this. Mrs. Sinclair, one of the officers said gently, we've reviewed the security footage. You became agitated and fell. Your brother made threatening gestures toward your husband. We're considering charging him with assault. No, Grace sobbed. You're lying. That's not what happened. The lawyer placed papers on her bedside table. You have 24 hours to respond. I suggest you cooperate. Fighting will only make this harder on everyone, especially your premature infant son who needs stability, not a custody battle. They left. All of them. Even the nurses, under orders to give the patient space. Grace lay alone in the recovery room, stitched and stapled and broken, knowing her baby was down the hall fighting for his life, knowing Marcus had just stolen everything from her in one calculated move. She didn't know that in the NICU, Connor was using his detective credentials to gain access. He photographed Grace's injuries, the bruising on her wrist where Marcus grabbed her, the impact marks from her fall, the medical report showing placental abruption consistent with trauma. Evidence, legal, documented, undeniable evidence. And in the hospital parking lot, Jake sat in their rental car, hands shaking with rage, calling every military contact he still had, asking questions about surveillance, about security systems, about how to find footage that people wanted to disappear. The brothers were done playing by the rules. Marcus Sinclair had just started a war, and he had no idea who he was fighting. Because Jake Morrison wasn't just an ex-Marine with PTSD, he was Force Recon, elite special operations, a man trained to hunt enemies in their own territory. And Connor Morrison wasn't just a homicide detective. He was the lead investigator on his department's cold case unit, a man who'd built his career on finding evidence everyone else thought was gone forever. Marcus Sinclair had hurt the wrong man's sister, and he was about to discover that revenge, real revenge, isn't about violence. It's about patience, precision, and making your enemy destroy themselves while you watch. The brothers met in the hospital parking garage at dawn, both exhausted, both furious. "He's untouchable here," Connor said. "He owns this town, the police, the hospital, probably the judges. We can't fight him legally, not in Connecticut." "Then we don't fight legally," Jake said. "We fight smart. We investigate. We find his weaknesses, and we burn his whole empire down." Connor looked at his younger brother, saw the cold calculation in his eyes, the same look Jake had worn in Afghanistan before a mission. "If we do this," Connor said slowly, "we can't go halfway. We're either all in or we walk away now." Jake thought of Grace, lying in that hospital bed, alone, broken, her baby in NICU, her life in pieces. "I'm all in," Jake said. "Let's find out who Marcus Sinclair really is, and then let's show him what happens when you hurt a Morrison." Connor nodded. "First, we find his other victims, Rebecca Cole, Jennifer Hayes, Melissa Grant. If he's done this before, there's evidence. There are patterns. We find them." "And Natalie Ross?" Jake asked. "We find out who she really is, because I don't buy the executive assistant story. Women don't help men destroy other women for free. She's got her own agenda." They shook hands. Then Connor said, "Grace can't know what we're planning. Not yet. She's too vulnerable. They'll use anything she knows against her in court." "Agreed," Jake said. "As far as she knows, we're building a legal case." "But really?" Jake's smile was cold. "Really, we're hunting, and Marcus Sinclair is the prey." Inside the hospital, Grace held her premature baby for the first time. He was so tiny, covered in tubes and wires, fighting for every breath. The nurse helped her adjust him against her chest, skin-to-skin contact, kangaroo care. "He's a fighter," the nurse said, "just like his mama." Grace kissed her son's tiny head. "I'm going to protect you," she whispered. "No matter what it takes, your uncles and I, we're going to keep you safe." She didn't know that her brothers were already putting together a plan so dangerous, so calculated, so ruthless, that Marcus Sinclair would wish he'd never heard the Morrison name. The war had begun, and there would be no mercy. Grace was released from the hospital 3 days after her emergency C-section. Her baby, who she'd named David after their father, remained in NICU. The doctors said he'd need at least 2 months of care. 2 months that Grace would have to navigate without any legal rights to her own child. Marcus's lawyers had filed their emergency custody motion. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Grace's court-appointed attorney was a young woman named Sarah Miller, fresh out of law school, overwhelmed and underfunded. "I have to be honest with you," Sarah said in their first meeting. "Marcus Sinclair has the best legal team in the state. His prenup is airtight. The hospital incident is documented as you being unstable and falling, and he's positioned himself as the concerned father trying to protect his premature infant from an unfit mother." "But that's not what happened," Grace said. She was still healing from surgery, moving slowly, exhausted from pumping breast milk every 3 hours to give David whatever small advantage she could. "It doesn't matter what actually happened," Sarah said gently. It matters what we can prove. And right now, all the evidence points to their narrative, not yours. Connor sat beside Grace, his detective notebook open. What about the security footage? It should show Marcus kicking the bed. Sarah shook her head. The hospital claims the footage from that specific camera malfunctioned. All they have is hallway footage showing Mr. Sinclair and Ms. Ross entering the room calmly, then your brother Jake appearing to make aggressive movements. That's bullshit, Jake said from his position by the window. He'd been banned from the hospital after the incident. Couldn't even see his nephew. Maybe, Sarah said, but it's the bullshit that will hold up in court. Connor leaned forward. What if we could prove Marcus has done this before? To other women? Sarah hesitated. That would be helpful, but prior bad acts are difficult to introduce as evidence unless there's a clear pattern. Do you have documentation? Working on it, Connor said. After Sarah left, Jake turned to Connor. Tell me you've got something. I've got 3 names, Connor said. Jennifer Hayes, Rebecca Cole, Melissa Grant, all married to Marcus, all ended badly. I'm flying to California tomorrow to interview Rebecca Cole. What about Jennifer and Melissa? Both dead. I'm requesting the police reports, but it'll take time, and we're running out of time. Grace looked between her brothers. What aren't you telling me? Both men exchanged glances. We're telling you everything, Connor lied smoothly. We're building a case, gathering evidence, that's all. But Grace knew her brothers, knew when they were in mission mode, knew they were planning something they didn't want her to know about. Promise me, she said, her voice shaking. Promise me you won't do anything that will make this worse. I can't lose you both too. Jake crossed to her, knelt beside her chair. We're not going anywhere, baby sister. We're just making sure the truth comes out. It wasn't quite a lie, but it wasn't quite the truth either. That night, Connor flew to Los Angeles. Rebecca Cole was institutionalized at Riverside Psychiatric Institute, a private facility in the hills above Pasadena. Connor used his badge to gain access, claimed he was investigating a cold case that might be connected to one of Rebecca's former associates. It was thin, but the administrators didn't question a police detective. He found Rebecca in the common room. She was 41 years old but looked 60, heavily medicated, eyes unfocused, hands trembling. Connor sat across from her. Ms. Cole, my name is Connor Morrison. I'm a detective from Ohio. I need to ask you some questions about Marcus Sinclair. At the name, Rebecca's eyes snapped into focus. Fear flooded her face. He sent you. He's found me. No, Connor said quickly. He doesn't know I'm here. I'm not working for him. I'm working against him. He's married to my sister, and he's doing to her what he did to you. Rebecca stared at him. Then she started crying. I tried to warn her. I called her, but he must have blocked it. He always blocks everything. Tell me what happened, Connor said gently, pulling out his phone to record. Tell me everything. And Rebecca did. She'd met Marcus 8 years ago. He was charming, successful, swept her off her feet. They married quickly. Everything was perfect for the first 6 months. Then Marcus started isolating her, cutting her off from friends and family, taking control of her finances, making her feel like she was going crazy. He would move things, Rebecca said, her voice flat from years of medication. My keys, my phone, my medications. Then he'd act like I was being forgetful. He'd tell me I was stressed, that I needed to see someone. The gaslighting escalated. Marcus would tell Rebecca she'd said things she had no memory of saying, would claim she'd made plans she'd never made, would insist she was becoming increasingly erratic. He got me to see a psychiatrist, Rebecca continued. Dr. Thomas Morrison. Same last name as you, but no relation, I'm guessing. The doctor was on Marcus's payroll. He diagnosed me with early onset dementia, put me on medications that made me foggy and confused. How long did this go on? Connor asked. 2 years. By the end, I actually believed I was losing my mind. I tried to kill myself twice. The second time, Marcus had me committed here. I've been here for 6 years. And your family never intervened? Marcus controlled all the information. He told them I was dangerous, that I'd tried to hurt him. They believed him. Why wouldn't they? He's so convincing. Connor made notes. Did Marcus have someone helping him? A woman? Rebecca's eyes widened. How did you know? He's with someone now. Her name is Natalie Ross. Different name, Rebecca said. But yes, there was a woman. She pretended to be my friend, pretended to care about me. But she was helping Marcus the whole time, feeding him information, helping him isolate me. I think, I think she did it for money. Marcus paid her. Connor's instincts prickled. What was her name? Nicole something. I can't remember her last name. The medications make it hard to remember. Connor showed Rebecca a photo of Natalie Ross on his phone. Rebecca gasped. That's her. That's Nicole. Same face, different name, but that's definitely her. Connor had his first concrete connection. Natalie Ross, or Nicole, or whatever her real name was, had been involved in destroying at least one other woman. This wasn't a romance. It was a partnership, a con operation. Rebecca, Connor said carefully, would you testify to this in court? Rebecca looked terrified. If I testify, Marcus will kill me. He can't touch you here. You don't understand. Marcus Sinclair can touch anyone, anywhere. He has money, connections, people who owe him. I've been hiding in plain sight for 6 years. If I expose him, he'll find a way to silence me. Connor couldn't argue with her fear. He'd seen enough in his career to know that people with enough money and motivation could make problems disappear. What if I could protect you? Connor asked. What if it could get you out of here, into a safe location, with round-the-clock security? How? Rebecca asked. You're a detective from Ohio. You have no power here. Connor smiled grimly. I've got something better than power. I've got a very angry ex-Marine brother who specializes in extraction operations. While Connor was in California, Jake was doing his own investigation. He'd spent 3 days surveilling Marcus's penthouse in Manhattan. The man kept a predictable schedule. Left for work at 7 a.m., returned at 7 p.m. Natalie Ross arrived at around 8 most evenings. On the 4th night, Jake broke into the building. It wasn't hard. He'd breached heavily guarded compounds in Afghanistan. A luxury Manhattan high-rise with a distracted doorman was child's play. He disabled the security cameras with a device he'd gotten from a friend who worked in counter-surveillance. He had 12 minutes before the system would reset and alert building security. He picked the lock on Marcus's penthouse, swept the apartment for additional security, found 2 cameras, disabled them. Then he began his search. Marcus's home office was a goldmine. Financial documents, multiple business accounts, offshore holdings, and a locked file cabinet. Jake picked the lock in 40 seconds. Inside were 3 folders, each labeled with a woman's name. Jennifer Hayes, Rebecca Cole, Melissa Grant. Jake photographed every document, bank statements showing large transfers of money before each woman disappeared from Marcus's life. Life insurance policies, prenuptial agreements, medical records showing psychiatric evaluations. It was a blueprint. Marcus had perfected his con over 3 marriages. Each woman had money or assets. Each woman was systematically isolated, gaslighted, and destroyed. Each woman's resources were legally transferred to Marcus, and then each woman was discarded. Jennifer Hayes, life insurance payout of $1.2 million after her suicide. Rebecca Cole, committed to psychiatric facility after breakdown. Her savings of $800,000 transferred to Marcus as her legal guardian. Melissa Grant, died in car accident. Her estate, worth $2 million, went to Marcus as her surviving spouse. Total take, $4 million over 8 years. And now Marcus was running the same con on Grace. Target, her $500,000 trust fund, plus whatever he could extract through custody and child support. Jake's hands shook with rage as he photographed the documents. This wasn't just abuse. It was premeditated financial murder. He found something else, a burner phone hidden in a book. Jake turned it on. Text messages between Marcus and someone named N. Marcus, Grace is playing hardball. May need to accelerate timeline. N. Be patient. The baby is leverage. Once he's born and stable, we proceed as planned. Marcus, and if she fights? Nin, then we make her disappear like we did Melissa. Jake's blood ran cold. They were planning to kill Grace. He photographed every message. Then he found the most damning evidence of all, a video file on the phone. He played it. It was Rebecca Cole years ago before Marcus destroyed her. She was vibrant, happy, laughing at something off camera. Then Marcus's voice. Rebecca, baby, why don't you take your medication? Rebecca, I don't need medication. I feel fine. Marcus, you're being difficult again. You know what happens when you're difficult. The video showed Marcus forcibly medicating Rebecca, holding her down, making her swallow pills. Jake saved everything to a secure cloud drive. Then he carefully restored everything to its original position, disabled his camera blockers, left as silently as he'd entered. 12 minutes total, no alarms, no trace. He called Connor. I've got him. Financial records, medical records, text messages, planning to harm Grace. This son of a bitch has been running the same con for 8 years, and I can prove it. Can we use it in court? Connor asked. Not legally. I obtained it through an illegal search. Then what's the point? Jake smiled coldly. The point is, now we know exactly who we're dealing with, and we can build a legal case around what I found. We know where to look, what to subpoena, how to dismantle him piece by piece. And if the legal case doesn't work, then we use what I found a different way. We leak it to the press, to his investors, to everyone who thinks Marcus Sinclair is a respectable businessman. We destroy his reputation so thoroughly that he'll have nothing left. Connor was quiet. That's dangerous, Jake. We'd be admitting to breaking the law. I don't care, Jake said. He's planning to kill our sister. You think I give a damn about breaking and entering charges? We do this smart, Connor insisted. We protect Grace legally first. But if that doesn't work, then we burn him down. Agreed? Agreed, Jake said. What neither brother knew was that Natalie Ross had her own surveillance. She'd noticed Jake watching the building. She'd seen him enter. Her own security system had captured everything. And she was smiling as she watched the footage, because Jake Morrison had just given her exactly what she needed to destroy both brothers. The trap was closing, and everyone was playing right into her hands. The courtroom was cold. Grace sat at the defendant's table with Sarah Miller, her court-appointed attorney. Across the aisle, Marcus had a team of 5 lawyers, each carrying expensive leather briefcases. Judge Patricia Winters presided. 60 years old, no nonsense, with a reputation for being fair, but harsh. The custody hearing began. Marcus's lead attorney, Richard Blackwood, stood. He was everything Sarah was not. Experienced, confident, expensive. Your Honor, Blackwood began, my client, Marcus Sinclair, is here today seeking full custody of his infant son, David, born prematurely at 30 weeks due to his mother's negligence and mental instability. Grace's hands clenched in her lap. Blackwood continued. Mrs. Sinclair has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior. She fled the family home while 7 months pregnant, despite medical advice to rest. She made wild accusations about my client, claiming he planned her pregnancy, that he's involved in some elaborate conspiracy. She has alienated herself from all friends and family, except for 2 brothers, one of whom has a documented history of PTSD and violent outbursts. Sarah stood. Objection. Relevance? I'm establishing pattern of behavior, Blackwood said smoothly. Overruled, Judge Winters said. Continue. The night David was born, Mrs. Sinclair became so agitated in her hospital room that she fell, causing premature labor. The fall resulted in emergency surgery and a baby fighting for his life in NICU. My client, meanwhile, has remained calm, rational, and focused on his son's well-being. Blackwood presented evidence. Hospital records showing Grace fled her home. The psychiatric evaluation ordered by Marcus's doctor, diagnosing Grace with postpartum psychosis despite the baby not being born yet. Character witnesses, Marcus's business associates, all testifying to his stability and success. Then Blackwood called Marcus to the stand. Marcus wore a Navy suit. He looked like every judge's ideal of a concerned father. Composed, responsible, pained by his wife's deterioration. Mr. Sinclair, Blackwood asked, can you describe your wife's behavior in the weeks leading up to David's birth? Marcus sighed, playing the reluctant witness perfectly. Grace became increasingly paranoid. She accused me of blocking her phone calls, of stealing money, of having an affair. None of it was true. I was worried about her. I consulted with doctors. They recommended psychiatric evaluation. And did Mrs. Sinclair agree to evaluation? No, she became more erratic, started making threats. That's when I feared for the baby's safety and filed a police report. Did you at any time harm your wife? Never. I love Grace. This has been heartbreaking to watch. Sarah Miller cross-examined. She was nervous, but determined. Mr. Sinclair, how many times have you been married? Blackwood stood. Objection. Relevance? Your Honor, it establishes pattern of behavior, Sarah argued, using Blackwood's own language against him. Judge Winters considered. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Sinclair. Marcus's jaw tightened. This is my fourth marriage. And what happened to your previous wives? Objection, Blackwood said again. This is harassment. Overruled, Judge Winters said, leaning forward with interest. Mr. Sinclair, answer the question. My first wife died by suicide. My second wife had a mental breakdown and is in a care facility. My third wife died in a car accident. The courtroom went silent. Sarah pressed her advantage. That's 3 wives, all meeting tragic ends. And now your fourth wife is being declared mentally unstable, and you're seeking to take her child. Don't you find that pattern concerning? Marcus's composure cracked for just a moment. I find it tragic that I seem to attract troubled women. Or perhaps you create troubled women, Sarah said. Objection! Blackwood was on his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained, Judge Winters said. Ms. Miller, move on. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. Sarah called Grace to the stand. Grace was still healing from her C-section. She moved slowly, carefully. She wore a simple dress, no makeup, her hair pulled back. She looked exhausted and vulnerable. Sarah walked her through her version of events. The discovered credit card statements, the overheard phone call, the confrontation at the hospital, Marcus kicking the bed. Mrs. Sinclair, Sarah asked gently, do you love your son? More than anything, Grace said, tears streaming down her face. And do you believe you can care for him? Yes, I'm his mother. I've been pumping breast milk every 3 hours so he can have it in NICU. I call the nurses every 4 hours for updates. I would die for my son. Blackwood cross-examined. He was brutal. Mrs. Sinclair, isn't it true you've been diagnosed with postpartum psychosis? No, I've never been diagnosed. Blackwood presented the psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Thomas Morrison. This evaluation, conducted by a licensed psychiatrist, says otherwise. It states you exhibit paranoid delusions, erratic behavior, and pose a danger to yourself and others. That doctor works for Marcus, Grace protested. He was paid to write that. Do you have proof of that? No, but... So you're asking this court to believe that a licensed medical professional with no history of misconduct would risk his career to falsify a psychiatric evaluation, all as part of some elaborate conspiracy? When he said it like that, it sounded insane. Mrs. Sinclair, did you or did you not flee your home while 7 months pregnant? Yes, but only because... Yes or no answers, please. Did you flee? Yes. Did you ignore medical advice to rest? I was trying to get away from... Yes or no? Yes, Grace whispered. And on the night David was born prematurely, were you or were you not agitated in your hospital room? Because Marcus brought his mistress to... Yes or no, Mrs. Sinclair? Yes, Blackwood turned to the judge. Your Honor, the evidence speaks for itself. Mrs. Sinclair is a danger to herself and her child. My client is asking for temporary full custody until Mrs. Sinclair can undergo proper psychiatric treatment and demonstrate she's fit to parent. Sarah did her best on redirect, but the damage was done. Judge Winters took a recess to consider. 2 hours later, she returned with her ruling. This court finds that while Mrs. Sinclair clearly loves her son, there are serious concerns about her mental state and decision-making capabilities. The premature birth of David Sinclair was triggered by Mrs. Sinclair's actions. The baby's current fragile condition is a direct result of her instability. Grace felt the world tilting. Therefore, this court grants temporary full custody to Marcus Sinclair. Mrs. Sinclair will be allowed supervised visitation 2 hours per week, pending completion of psychiatric evaluation and parenting classes. No, Grace gasped. No, please. Furthermore, Judge Winters continued, Mrs. Sinclair is ordered to undergo 30 days of inpatient psychiatric treatment at Riverside Psychiatric Institute, the same facility where Rebecca Cole had been imprisoned for 6 years. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel fell. Grace collapsed. Sarah tried to hold her up. Jake and Connor rushed forward from the gallery, but security blocked them. Marcus stood, shook hands with his lawyers, and smiled. Outside the courthouse, Grace sat on the steps, broken. Connor sat beside her, arm around her shoulders. Jake paced like a caged animal. "They're going to lock me up," Grace said numbly, "in the same place he put Rebecca. I'll never get out. I'll never see David again." "We're not letting that happen," Connor said firmly. "How?" Grace looked at her brother. "You heard the judge. Marcus won. He has everything, the money, the lawyers, the system. We have nothing." Jake stopped pacing. "We have the truth." "The truth doesn't matter," Grace said. "You heard the judge. Everything I said sounded crazy." "Then we make people listen," Jake said. "We take this public. We find reporters. We find Marcus's other victims. We make so much noise they can't ignore us." "And risk contempt of court?" Connor asked. "Risk making things worse for Grace?" "Worse," Jake laughed bitterly. "They're about to lock her in a psychiatric prison. How much worse can it get?" Connor pulled out his phone. "I need to make a call." He walked away. Grace watched him go. "What's he doing?" "Calling in favors," Jake said. "Connor's been a cop for 15 years. He knows people. Prosecutors, FBI agents, journalists. If anyone can break through Marcus's wall, it's him." But what Connor was really doing was calling his contact at the FBI. Because during his investigation, he'd uncovered something about Marcus Sinclair that went beyond domestic abuse and financial fraud. Marcus had been laundering money through his real estate company, millions of dollars from unnamed sources. Connor suspected organized crime connections, maybe drug money, maybe worse. And if Connor could prove it, Marcus wouldn't just lose custody, he'd go to federal prison for a very long time. The custody battle was just the beginning. The real war was about to start. Grace was given 24 hours to report to Riverside Psychiatric Institute. She spent that night at a hotel with her brothers, knowing it might be the last night of freedom she had for a long time. "I need to see David before they take me," Grace said. "Just one more time." "Visiting hours are over," Connor said, "but Jake and I will get you in." They drove to Ocean View Medical Center at midnight. The NICU was on the 4th floor. Jake had scouted the security. 2 cameras, 1 guard, a locked door requiring keycard access. "I'll distract the guard," Jake said. "Connor, you loop the camera footage. Grace, when we give you the signal, you have 3 minutes. Get in, see your baby, get out." It was risky. If they were caught, it would be used against Grace in court. But they were past caring about court. Jake approached the guard, started a conversation about football. Connor slipped past, accessed the security room, and looped the camera feed. Grace moved silently down the hallway to the NICU entrance. She swiped Connor's borrowed key card. The door opened. Inside, the NICU was quiet except for the gentle beeping of monitors and the whoosh of ventilators. David was in an incubator in the corner. Grace went to him, tears streaming down her face. He was so small, covered in tubes and wires, but he was breathing on his own now, getting stronger every day. Grace reached through the incubator's ports, gently touched his tiny hand. He wrapped his fingers around hers. "Mommy loves you," she whispered. "No matter what happens, no matter where they take me, I love you. Your uncles are going to protect you. They're going to fight for us. And I promise I'll find my way back to you." A nurse appeared. Grace froze. But the nurse, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, just smiled. "You're David's mother," she said softly. "I've been caring for him. He knows your voice. When I play the recordings of you talking to him, his heart rate stabilizes." "I'm not supposed to be here," Grace said. "I didn't see you," the nurse said. "And the cameras were mysteriously offline for 3 minutes. Funny how technology glitches sometimes." Grace looked at this stranger who was offering her mercy. "Thank you." "I've been a NICU nurse for 25 years, the woman said. "I can tell the difference between mothers who care and parents who don't. Your husband has visited David exactly twice. You call every 4 hours. I know who the real parent is. She pressed something into Grace's hand, a small recording device. I'm not supposed to give you this, the nurse said, but I recorded something last week. Your husband and his girlfriend were here visiting David. They didn't know I was in the supply closet. They were talking about you, about their plans. It's all on here. Grace's hands trembled as she closed her fingers around the device. Why are you helping me? Because I've seen too many good mothers lose their babies to systems that favor money over love. And because someone helped me once when I needed it. Pay it forward. The nurse left. Grace had one more minute with her son. Your daddy is not a good man, Grace whispered to David, but you're going to be different. You're going to be strong and kind and brave, like your uncles. I'll see you soon, baby. I promise. She kissed his tiny forehead through the incubator and left. Back in the hotel, Grace played the recording. Jake and Connor listened intently. Marcus's voice. How long do we have to keep up this devoted father act? Natalie's voice. Until the custody is finalized, then we can move David somewhere private, hire a nanny. We'll barely have to see him. Marcus. And Grace? Natalie. 30 days in Riverside should break her sufficiently. If not, we extend it. Keep her medicated. Eventually she'll just fade away. Marcus. Like Rebecca. Natalie. Exactly like Rebecca. This formula works. We've proven it 3 times now. Marcus. $4 million from 3 wives. Grace's trust fund makes it $4.5 million. Not bad for 8 years of work. Natalie laughed. And this time we get a baby we can use for tax breaks and sympathy. The recording ended. Jake's fists were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. They're not even pretending to care about David. He's just another asset to hire them. Connor rewound the recording, listening again. This is evidence, real evidence, admissible in court. And how, Grace asked him. A nurse gave it to me secretly. It's probably a legal recording. Not in California, Connor said. It's a one-party consent state. If the nurse was present, even if they didn't know she was there, the recording is legal. But we're in Connecticut, Sarah Miller said. She joined them at the hotel after the hearing. Doesn't matter, Connor said, and the recording was made in California where it's legal. It can be introduced in Connecticut court as evidence obtained legally in another jurisdiction. Sarah looked at the recording device. This changes everything. We can file an emergency motion, demonstrate that Marcus has been lying about his intentions, that this whole custody case is fraudulent. Will Judge Winters hear it? Grace asked. She has to, Sarah said. This is new evidence, material evidence. She can't ignore it. They worked through the night. Sarah drafted the motion. Connor wrote an affidavit explaining how the recording was obtained. Grace provided context for the voices on the tape. By morning, they had a case, a real case. For the first time since this nightmare began, they had hope. But hope is a dangerous thing because it makes you vulnerable. It makes you believe that maybe, just maybe, justice exists. And Marcus Sinclair had built his empire on destroying people's hope. Natalie Ross received an alert on her phone at 6 a.m. Motion filed in Morrison v. Sinclair case. New evidence submitted. She called Marcus immediately. They have a recording from the hospital. What recording? Marcus was groggy, hungover from celebrating his victory. Us, talking about Grace, about the plan, about the other wives, about the money. Marcus went cold. How? A nurse must have recorded us. We need to discredit it. Say it's fake. Say it's taken out of context. No, Marcus said slowly. We need to eliminate the problem at the source. What source? The nurse. Find out who gave them that recording. Make sure she can't testify. Natalie was quiet for a moment. Marcus, we're not murderers. Aren't we? Marcus asked. Jennifer Hayes didn't kill herself. We helped her along. Melissa Grant's brake lines didn't cut themselves. We're already in this deep. What's one more? This is different. This is active. This is murder. This is survival, Marcus corrected. If that recording gets admitted, we lose everything. Prison, money, everything. So we eliminate the recording, we eliminate the witnesses, and we make sure the Morrison family understands what happens when they fight me. Natalie's hands shook as she hung up. She thought she was running a long game to destroy Marcus Sinclair the way he destroyed her. But she was starting to realize she'd gotten in too deep, that Marcus was more dangerous than she'd ever imagined, and that people were going to die before this was over. The question was, would she be one of them? The emergency hearing was scheduled for that afternoon. Judge Winters agreed to hear the motion. Though she didn't look happy about it, Sarah Miller played the recording in open court. Every word, every casual discussion of fraud and manipulation and destroyed lives. When it finished, the courtroom was silent. Judge Winters looked at Marcus. "Mr. Sinclair, would you like to respond?" Marcus stood. He'd had hours to prepare. "Your Honor, this recording is clearly manufactured. Voice synthesis technology is readily available. Anyone could have created this." "We can have it authenticated," Sarah said. "It's also illegally obtained," Marcus's lawyer added. "My client's privacy was violated by a hospital employee. This is inadmissible." "The recording was made in California, a one-party consent state," Sarah countered. "It's legal." Judge Winters held up her hand. "I'll make a ruling after I've reviewed the legal precedents. But I will say this. If this recording is authentic, it paints an extremely disturbing picture." "Your Honor," Blackwood said smoothly, "my client is being accused of elaborate conspiracy based on a recording that could easily be fake. We ask that you dismiss this motion and proceed with the original custody ruling." The judge considered. "I'm going to order an independent forensic analysis of the recording. If it's authentic, we'll revisit custody. If it's fake, Mrs. Sinclair will face additional charges for filing false evidence. This hearing is adjourned until the analysis is complete." It was a small victory, but it was something. Outside the courthouse, Grace allowed herself to breathe. "We have a chance," she said, "an actual chance." "Don't celebrate yet," Connor warned. "Marcus is going to come after that nurse. We need to find her, protect her." "I don't know her name," Grace said. "She didn't tell me." Jake was already on his phone. "I can get into the NICU staffing records, find out who was working that night. We get to her before Marcus does." They didn't know that Marcus had already found her. Her name was Patricia Santos. She was 52 years old. She lived alone in a small apartment in Torrance. She drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic, and she was the only thing standing between Marcus and complete victory. That night, Patricia Santos left Ocean View Medical Center at 11 p.m. She was exhausted from a double shift. Didn't notice the car following her, didn't realize she was in danger until she pulled into her apartment complex and the car blocked her in. Marcus got out. He was alone. No Natalie, no witnesses. "Miss Santos," he said pleasantly, "I need to talk to you about a recording you made." Patricia tried to run. Marcus was faster. He grabbed her, pushed her against her car. "You made a mistake," he said. "You got involved in something that's none of your business. Now I need that recording back, and I need you to forget you ever heard anything." "I don't have it," Patricia gasped. "I gave it to the mother. It's already in court." "But you could testify. You could authenticate it. That's a problem for me." "Are you threatening me?" Marcus smiled. "I'm offering you a choice. Take $50,000, move somewhere far away, start over, or refuse and I'll make sure you lose your nursing license, your pension, and your freedom. I'll have you charged with HIPAA violations, illegal recording, theft of hospital property. You'll never work again." Patricia met his eyes, saw the coldness there, understood that this man had destroyed 3 women and would destroy her without hesitation. "I'll take the money," she whispered. "Smart choice," Marcus said. He handed her an envelope. "There's $10,000 here, cash. The rest comes after you leave California and sign a non-disclosure agreement. You have 24 hours. He got back in his car and drove away. Patricia stood in the parking lot, shaking, holding the envelope. She'd wanted to help Grace, but she had 2 kids in college, a mortgage, a life she couldn't afford to lose. She got in her car and drove, not to her apartment, to the police station, where she asked to speak to Detective Connor Morrison from Ohio, because some things are worth more than money. And Patricia Santos had spent 25 years protecting babies. She wasn't about to let one more mother lose her child to a monster. Connor recorded Patricia's statement, the attempted bribery, the threats, all of it admissible, documented, witnessed by 3 police officers. "You're a brave woman," Connor told her. I'm a terrified woman, Patricia corrected, but I'm also a nurse. First, do no harm. Marcus Sinclair is harm incarnate. Someone has to stop him. We will, Connor promised. My brother and we're going to make sure he never hurts anyone again. Patricia looked at him. Your sister is lucky to have you. Our sister is a fighter. She just needed someone to believe her. The next morning, Sarah Miller filed additional charges against Marcus. Witness tampering, bribery, attempted obstruction of justice. And for the first time, Marcus Sinclair looked worried. His empire was starting to crack. And Grace Morrison's brothers were the ones swinging the hammer. The forensic analysis came back 3 days later. The recording was authentic. Voice patterns matched Marcus Sinclair and Natalie Ross with 99.7% certainty. No evidence of digital manipulation. Judge Winters called an emergency hearing. Mr. Sinclair, she said, her voice cold with fury, I've reviewed the forensic report. The recording is real. Your voice is on that tape, discussing fraud, conspiracy, and financial exploitation of your wife. Explain yourself. Marcus stood. His expensive lawyers surrounded him, but they looked nervous now. Your Honor, those statements were taken out of context. Ms. Ross and I were discussing a hypothetical scenario, a business negotiation, not actual plans. A hypothetical scenario that included your previous wives? Judge Winters interrupted. Mr. Sinclair, do you take this court for a fool? Your Honor, we maintain that enough. Judge Winters slammed her gavel. I'm ordering a full investigation into your previous marriages. Jennifer Hayes, Rebecca Cole, Melissa Grant. If there's evidence of wrongdoing, you will face criminal charges. In the meantime, custody of David Sinclair is hereby suspended pending outcome of the investigation. What does that mean? Grace asked Sarah. It means David becomes a ward of the court temporarily. Neither you nor Marcus has custody until the investigation is complete. It wasn't perfect. Grace still couldn't take her baby home, but Marcus couldn't either. It was a draw. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. The story had broken. Real estate millionaire accused of fraud and abuse. 3 dead wives haunt custody battle. Secret recording exposes shocking plot. Marcus pushed through the crowd, refusing to comment. Natalie followed, head down, hiding her face. Grace stood on the courthouse steps, camera flashes in her face, and for the first time in months, she felt powerful. Marcus Sinclair tried to destroy me, she said into the microphones. He tried to make me believe I was crazy, that I was unfit, that I deserved to lose my child. But I'm not crazy, I'm not alone, and I will never stop fighting for my son. The footage went viral. By that evening, Grace Morrison was trending on social media. Support poured in. Domestic violence organizations reached out. Other women came forward with their own stories about Marcus Sinclair. 4 more women, all had dated Marcus briefly, all had been systematically manipulated, gaslighted, and discarded. None had gone as far as marriage, but the pattern was clear. Connor compiled every statement, every piece of evidence, built a case so comprehensive that even Marcus's expensive lawyers couldn't tear it apart. But Marcus wasn't done fighting, because desperate men do desperate things. 2 days after the hearing, Grace received a call at the hotel. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Grace Morrison? A distorted voice asked. Yes? You need to stop. Drop the custody case. Drop the investigation, or people you care about will get hurt. Grace's blood went cold. Who is this? Someone who's watching. We know where your brothers live. We know their routines. Drop the case, or they'll have accidents. Just like Melissa Grant had an accident. The call ended. Grace ran to Jake in Connor's room. Someone just threatened you, both of you. They said you'll have accidents if I don't drop the case. Jake checked his gun. Let them try. Connor was more practical. We need protection, round-the-clock security. If Marcus is willing to threaten murder, he's capable of following through. They hired private security, 2 former Marines who'd served with Jake, armed, trained, ready. But the threat had its intended effect. Grace was terrified now, not for herself, for her brothers. Maybe I should drop the case, she said that night. Maybe it's not worth your lives. That's exactly what he wants you to think, Connor said. He wants you scared and compliant. But we don't negotiate with terrorists. He'll kill you, Grace said, tears streaming down her face. He's already killed 3 people. What's 2 more? Jake knelt in front of his sister. Remember what Dad used to say? Morrisons don't run from bullies. We run through them. Dad also said, protect family above everything. Exactly, Connor said. And right now, protecting you and David means finishing this. If we back down, Marcus wins. He gets custody. He gets your money. And in a year or two, when the heat dies down, you end up like Jennifer or Melissa, dead. So we finish it, Jake said. We find every piece of evidence. We expose every crime. And we make sure Marcus Sinclair spends the rest of his life in prison where he can't hurt anyone ever again. Grace looked between her brothers, saw their determination, their love, their absolute refusal to let evil win. Okay, she whispered. We finish it. The next move came from an unexpected source, Rebecca Cole. Connor had stayed in touch with her after his visit to Riverside. She'd been following the case online, and she'd made a decision. She called Connor. I'll testify. Whatever it takes, I'll tell the court everything Marcus did to me. Rebecca, you said he'd kill you if you exposed him. He's going to kill someone anyway. If not me, then Grace, or you, or your brother. Better me than an innocent person. Connor arranged for Rebecca to be transferred to a secure facility under federal protection. The FBI had gotten involved now, investigating Marcus for fraud, money laundering, and possible murder. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh took over the case. She was 50 years old, 25 years with the FBI, specializing in white-collar crime and domestic terrorism. Mr. Morrison, she said when Connor met with her, your brother's illegal search of Marcus Sinclair's penthouse cannot be used in court, but it gave us direction. We've been digging into his finances, found offshore accounts, shell companies, and money trails that lead to some very dangerous people. Who? Connor asked. Eastern European organized crime. Russian oligarchs looking to launder money through U.S. real estate. Marcus has been taking their money, buying properties, and flipping them for clean cash. He's in deep with people who don't forgive betrayal. Connor felt sick. So even if we beat him in court, these people might come after Grace anyway? Not if we offer them something better, Walsh said. Marcus's records, bank account numbers, names of every person he's ever dealt with. We give them Marcus, they leave Grace alone. You want to use my sister as bait? I want to protect your sister by removing every threat. Marcus, his criminal connections. All of it. We set a trap. Marcus thinks he's meeting with his Russian contacts. Instead, he walks into an FBI sting. We arrest everyone. Clean sweep. And if it goes wrong? Walsh met his eyes. Then we all go down together. But right now, this is the best play we have. Connor called Jake, explained the plan. Jake's response was immediate. I'm in. Whatever it takes to end this. They didn't tell Grace. She was already under enough stress. Better to let her focus on recovery and visiting David while her brothers handled the dangerous work. The trap was set for Friday night. Marcus had a scheduled meeting with his Russian contact at a warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn. The FBI would be waiting, but Wednesday afternoon, everything fell apart. Natalie Ross walked into the FBI field office in Manhattan and asked to speak to Agent Walsh. I want to make a deal, Natalie said. Full immunity in exchange for everything I know about Marcus Sinclair. Walsh recorded the interview. Natalie laid it all out, every crime, every manipulation, every murder. Jennifer Hayes didn't commit suicide, Natalie said. Marcus drugged her, made it look like she overdosed. I helped him stage the scene. I was 23 and stupid, and I thought I was in love with him. And Melissa Grant? I cut her brake lines, Marcus told me to. Said it was necessary, said she was going to expose us. I did it. I'm guilty. Why confess now? Natalie looked exhausted. Because I'm next. Marcus is tying up loose ends. He tried to bribe the nurse. When that didn't work, he threatened Grace's brothers. Now he's talking about eliminating problems. I'm a problem. I know too much. So this is self-preservation. This is me trying to survive the monster I helped create. Walsh made the deal, full immunity for Natalie in exchange for her testimony. It was ugly. It meant a murderer would walk free, but it would guarantee Marcus's conviction. When Connor heard, he was furious. She killed Melissa Grant. She helped murder Jennifer Hayes. And she walks? She walks, so Marcus goes down, Walsh said. That's the deal. You want justice for your sister? This is how we get it. Connor called Jake. They met at a diner in Brooklyn, far from prying ears. Natalie gets immunity, Connor said. Marcus goes to prison, but the woman who helped him kill 3 people goes free. Jake's jaw clenched. That's not justice. No, it's the legal system. And sometimes they're not the same thing. And so what do we do? Connor was quiet for a long time. Then he said, we trust the FBI. We let them arrest Marcus. We get Grace her custody back. And then we make sure Natalie Ross understands that immunity from prosecution isn't the same as being safe. Connor, Jake said carefully, are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that some people don't deserve to sleep soundly at night. That's all. It was the closest either's brother had come to crossing a line they couldn't uncross. They both knew it. They both felt the weight of that moment. Finally, Jake said, we're not murderers. We're not like them. No, Connor agreed, we're not. But we're also not going to let her forget what she did. The FBI sting went down Friday night. Marcus walked into the warehouse expecting to meet his Russian contact. Instead, he walked into a ring of federal agents. Marcus Sinclair, you're under arrest for money laundering, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and racketeering. Marcus ran, made it 10 feet before being tackled by 3 agents. He fought, screamed, threatened to sue, promised to expose corruption. It didn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, Natalie's testimony, Rebecca's testimony, Patricia's testimony, the recording, bank statements, offshore accounts, a decade of crimes, all documented, all admissible. Marcus Sinclair's empire fell in one night. Grace watched the arrest on the news from her hotel room. She didn't feel victorious. She felt numb, exhausted, hollowed out by months of fighting. It's over, Sarah Miller said beside her. You won. Did I? Grace asked. My husband tried to kill me. My baby was born 3 months early and is still in NICU. I've been declared mentally unfit by a court. I'll be fighting to get my son back for months. Where's the victory in that? Sarah didn't have an answer, but Connor did. He arrived an hour later, Jake beside him. We have something to show you, Connor said. He played a video on his phone. It was David, in his NICU incubator. But he wasn't alone. Grace was there, sitting beside him, singing softly. I don't remember this, Grace said. It's from last week, Connor said. The nurses have been recording you with David. Every visit, every song, every story you tell him. Because they know that someday you're going to want to remember that you never gave up, that you fought for him every single day. Grace watched herself on the screen, watched herself being a mother despite everything, and for the first time in months, she cried. Not from fear or pain or exhaustion, but from something that felt almost like hope. Marcus is going to prison, Jake said, probably for the rest of his life. The custody case will be reopened. With his confession and Natalie's testimony, you'll get full custody. It'll take time, but you'll get your son back. And Natalie? Grace asked. The brothers exchanged glances. She made a deal. Immunity. Grace's hands clenched. She murdered people. She helped Marcus destroy 3 women. And she walks away? Not exactly, Connor said carefully. She'll never work again. Her face is all over the news. She'll have to live with what she did. That's its own kind of prison. Grace wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the injustice, but she was too tired, and she had bigger priorities. I want to see my son, she said, not through a window, not with supervision. I want to hold him. Can we make that happen? Connor smiled. I already called the hospital. With Marcus arrested and the custody case suspended, you have full visitation rights. We can go right now. Grace was already grabbing her coat. They drove to Ocean View Medical Center, walked through the halls where this nightmare had started, entered the NICU where David Morrison lay fighting for his life. Grace went to him, reached into the incubator. He was bigger now, stronger. His eyes opened when she touched him. Hi, baby, Grace whispered. Mommy's here, and I'm never leaving again. David wrapped his tiny hand around her finger, held on tight. Jake and Connor watched from the doorway. seeing their sister finally at peace. "We did it," Jake said quietly. "Not yet," Connor corrected. "Marcus goes to trial in 3 months. Until he's convicted, it's not over." "Then we finish it," Jake said. "Whatever it takes." But what they didn't know was that Marcus Sinclair had one final card to play, and it would turn everything upside down one more time. Marcus Sinclair sat in federal lockup, convinced his lawyers would save him. He'd bought his way out of trouble before. This time would be no different. He was wrong. Connor Morrison had spent 3 weeks building an airtight case, not just for domestic violence, for murder. 3 dead wives. 3 accidents that weren't accidents at all. Jennifer Hayes' suicide note was written on Marcus's computer. Forensic analysis proved it. Melissa Grant's brake lines were cut with a tool found in Marcus's garage. His fingerprints were on it. Rebecca Cole's medical records showed she'd been systematically poisoned with medications that caused psychiatric symptoms. The prescriptions were all written by Dr. Thomas Morrison, who'd received $200,000 from Marcus over 6 years. The evidence was overwhelming, but Connor wanted more than a conviction. He wanted Marcus to suffer the way Grace had suffered. That's where Jake came in. Jake had connections from his Marine days, men who specialized in making life difficult for people who deserved it, not violence. Something worse, psychological warfare. In prison, Marcus started receiving letters, photos of his dead wives, newspaper clippings about their deaths, notes that said simply, "We know what you did." He tried to ignore them, told himself it was harassment from Grace's family. Then the nightmares started. Marcus would wake up screaming, seeing Jennifer's face, Rebecca's hollow eyes, Melissa's car going off the cliff. Night after night, no rest, no peace. The prison psychiatrist prescribed sleeping pills. Marcus took them. The nightmares got worse. What Marcus didn't know was that Jake had paid a guard to switch Marcus's sleeping pills with a mild hallucinogen. Nothing dangerous, just enough to make his guilty conscience manifest in vivid, terrifying dreams. Marcus began an unraveling, lost weight, couldn't sleep, started talking to himself. His lawyers grew concerned. "You need to pull yourself together for trial." But Marcus couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his victims. Meanwhile, Connor worked on Natalie Ross. She disappeared after giving her statement to the FBI. Gone into hiding, terrified that Marcus's criminal contacts would kill her. Connor found her in a motel in Nevada. She looked terrible, paranoid, exhausted. "You helped Marcus kill 3 women, Connor said. "You don't get to hide and pretend it never happened." "I have immunity," Natalie said. "Immunity from prosecution, not from consequences." Connor showed her photos. "These are the women you helped destroy. Jennifer, Rebecca, Melissa, and you almost made it 4 with my sister." Natalie started crying. "I was in love with him. I thought." "You thought wrong, and now you're going to make it right. You're going to testify in person in open court. You're going to look the world in the eye and admit what you did." "He'll kill me. He's in prison. He can't touch you." "His friends can." Connor leaned forward. "Then you better hope my testimony puts him away for life, because if he gets out, you won't be safe anywhere." Natalie agreed to testify. Back at the prison, Marcus received a visitor, a man he'd never met. The man sat down, smiled coldly. "My name is Victor Kowalski. I represent certain business associates of yours. The ones whose money you've been laundering." Marcus went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. And now the FBI knows too. My clients are unhappy, very unhappy. I didn't tell them anything. You got caught. That's enough. My clients have a simple message. If you implicate them in any way during your trial, your son David will have an unfortunate accident. Do you understand?" Marcus understood. He was trapped between the FBI, Grace's brothers, and the Russian mob. No way out. That night, Marcus tried to make a deal with prosecutors. Full confession in exchange for witness protection. Agent Jennifer Walsh listened to his offer. Then she said, "We don't need your confession. We have Natalie. We have Rebecca. We have the evidence. You have nothing to bargain with. I can give you names, the people I laundered money for. We already have their names from your files, the ones your brother-in-law Jake photographed when he broke into your apartment." Marcus's face went white. "That evidence is inadmissible, illegal search." Walsh smiled. We didn't use it in court. We used it as a roadmap. Everything Jake found, we found again legally. Search warrants, subpoenas, all by the book. You're going down, Mr. Sinclair, and there's nothing you can do about it. Marcus's last hope died. The trial began 2 weeks later. The prosecution presented their case methodically. Financial records, medical testimony, witness statements. Natalie Ross took the stand. She was shaking but determined. I helped Marcus Sinclair destroy 3 women, she said. I helped him murder Jennifer Hayes. I cut Melissa Grant's brake lines. I assisted in the psychological torture of Rebecca Cole. And I would have helped him destroy Grace Morrison if her brothers hadn't stopped us. The courtroom was silent. Why did you do it? The prosecutor asked. Natalie's voice broke. Because I was weak. Because I was greedy. Because I convinced myself that love justified anything. I was wrong, I'm guilty, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to atone for what I did. Marcus's lawyer tried to discredit her. You have immunity. You're just saying what the prosecution wants to hear. No, Natalie said, I'm saying the truth. Marcus Sinclair is a monster, and I helped him. That makes me a monster too. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They came back with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. 3 counts of first-degree murder. 1 count of attempted murder. Multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. The judge sentenced Marcus to 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. As they led him away in chain, Marcus looked at Grace. She sat between her brothers, holding baby David. This isn't over, Marcus hissed. Jake stood up, walked toward Marcus until a guard stopped him. He leaned close and whispered, Yes, it is. You're going to spend the rest of your life in a cage, and every night when you close your eyes, you'll see their faces. Jennifer, Rebecca, Melissa, they'll haunt you forever. That's our revenge. Marcus was dragged away, screaming. Grace watched him go, felt nothing, no satisfaction, no anger, just relief that it was finally over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Grace made a brief statement. Marcus Sinclair tried to destroy me. He succeeded in destroying 3 other women. But he failed with me, because I had people who believed me, who fought for me, who refused to let evil win. To every woman in an abusive relationship, you're not alone. Fight, survive, win. That night, Grace, Jake, and Connor sat in Grace's hotel room. David slept peacefully in his carrier. It's really over, Grace said. It's really over, Connor confirmed. Jake raised his beer. To Dad, who taught us that protecting family is the only thing that matters. They drank to their father. To survival, to justice, and to the terrifying revenge that came not from violence, but from systematically dismantling a predator piece by piece until nothing remained but a broken man in a cage. 6 months after the trial, Grace Morrison stood in her new apartment in Portland, Oregon, 3,000 miles from Connecticut, from Marcus, from the nightmare. David crawled across the floor, babbling happily. He was 8 months old now, healthy, strong, no lasting effects from his premature birth. Grace had full custody. Marcus's parental rights were terminated. He would never see David again. Jake and Connor had both relocated to Portland. Jake opened a security company specializing in protecting domestic violence survivors. Connor started a private investigation firm focused on finding evidence in abuse cases the system ignored. The Morrison brothers had found their calling. Grace's doorbell rang. She opened it to find a woman in her 50s, well-dressed, nervous. Grace Morrison, my name is Elizabeth Grant. I was Melissa Grant's sister. Grace invited her in, made coffee, listened. I knew Marcus killed my sister, Elizabeth said. The police said it was an accident, but I knew. I tried to investigate, hired private detectives. No one would help me. Marcus was too powerful, too connected. I'm so sorry, Grace said. I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here to say thank you. You did what I couldn't do. You brought him to justice. My sister can finally rest. Elizabeth pulled out an envelope. Melissa had a life insurance policy, $2 million. Marcus got it all when she died, but I contested it after his conviction. The courts ruled in my favor. This check is for you, for your foundation. Grace looked at the check. $2 million made out to the Morrison Foundation. I can't accept this, Grace said. You have to. Melissa would want her money to help other women, to stop other men like Marcus. Please. Grace took the check, tears streaming down her face. I'll make sure it helps hundreds of women. Thousands. I promise. Elizabeth hugged her. Two survivors, connected by tragedy, united in purpose. After Elizabeth left, Grace called her brothers. We just got a $2 million donation, she told them. We can expand, open offices in 5 more cities, help so many more women. That's incredible, Connor said. There's something else, Grace said. I've been contacted by a producer. They want to make a documentary about the case, about Marcus, about domestic violence, about how we fought back. Are you going to do it? Jake asked. Grace looked at David, thought about Jennifer, Rebecca, and Melissa, thought about the 5,000 women her foundation had already helped. Yes, she said, people need to know that abusers aren't invincible, that you can fight back and win. The documentary premiered a year later. It was called The Morrison Case, How 3 Dead Wives Brought Down a Millionaire. It won awards, sparked national conversation, led to new legislation protecting domestic violence survivors. Grace became an advocate, testified before Congress, spoke at universities, shared her story again and again. But she also built a normal life. David started preschool, made friends, had play dates, knew nothing of his father except that he made bad choices and hurt people. Grace painted again, her art darker now, more powerful. Her first solo exhibition sold out. She dated cautiously. Trust didn't come easy anymore. But she was healing, slowly, steadily. 3 years after the trial, Grace received news. Marcus had been stabbed in prison, killed by another inmate whose wife Marcus had defrauded in a real estate deal years ago. Even in prison, Marcus's past had caught up to him. Grace felt nothing when she heard. No relief, no satisfaction. Just a distant sense that a chapter had finally closed. She didn't attend his funeral, didn't think about him, simply kept building the life he'd tried to destroy. David grew, started kindergarten, asked questions about his father. Your daddy did bad things, Grace told him. He hurt people. That's why he went to prison. But you're not like him. You're kind and good. You're a Morrison. We protect people. We don't hurt them. David seemed to understand, as much as a 5-year-old could. Years passed. The foundation grew, helped 10,000 women, 20,000, 50,000. Grace's story inspired legislation. The Grace Morrison Act provided federal funding for legal aid in domestic violence cases, reformed custody laws, protected survivors. She'd turned her worst nightmare into lasting change. On David's 10th birthday, Grace, Jake, and Connor took him hiking. At the summit, they looked out over the Pacific Ocean. Uncle Jake, David asked, did you really save Mom from the bad man? Jake glanced at Connor, then at Grace. Your mom saved herself. Your Uncle Connor and I just helped. But you scared him, right? Made him pay? Connor knelt beside his nephew. We made sure he could never hurt anyone again. That's what family does. We protect each other. David nodded seriously. When I grow up, I want to protect people too. Grace hugged her son, looked at her brothers. They'd all survived, all healed, all found purpose in the pain. You will, Grace said, because you're a Morrison, and Morrisons don't run from bullies. We run through them. That night, back at Grace's house, the brothers stayed for dinner. They laughed, told stories, watched David play. We did good, Jake said quietly. We did what we had to do, Connor corrected. Grace looked at her family, her son, her brothers, the life she'd built from ashes. We did more than that, she said. We won. And they had, not just in court, but in every day they chose to live fully, love deeply, and refuse to let the past define them. Marcus Sinclair had tried to break Grace Morrison. Instead, she'd broken his power to hurt anyone else. That was victory. That was justice. That was Grace. 20 years after the trial, Grace Morrison sat across from a journalist writing a book about domestic violence reform. What would you say to your younger self, the journalist asked, the woman lying on that hospital floor? Grace thought about it. She was 52 now. David was 20, studying law at Columbia, planning to specialize in family law. "I'd tell her she's going to survive," Grace said, "that in 20 years she'll have helped thousands of women escape abuse, that her son will grow up kind and strong, that the brothers who saved her will become her partners in changing the world." The journalist smiled. "Do you ever think about Marcus?" "No," Grace said simply. "He's dead. Gone. Irrelevant. I think about the women I can still help, the lives I can still save." The Morrison Foundation had grown beyond Grace's wildest dreams. Offices in 30 cities, a staff of 200, a budget of $50 million annually. They'd helped over 100,000 women escape abusive relationships. Grace's book, Surviving Sinclair, was required reading in law schools and social work programs across the country. She'd remarried 5 years ago. A good man named Thomas who loved David like his own son, who supported Grace's work, who understood her scars. Jake had 2 kids now. His security company employed 50 people, all veterans, all dedicated to protecting vulnerable people. Connor had retired from private investigation, now taught at Portland State University, criminal justice, domestic violence intervention, training the next generation of advocates. The Morrison family had transformed their trauma into purpose. On the 20th anniversary of Marcus's conviction, Grace held a gala fundraiser. 500 people attended, raised $10 million in one night. At the podium, Grace looked out at the crowd, saw survivors, advocates, lawyers, judges, people committed to change. 20 years ago, I was told I'd never win, Grace said, that Marcus Sinclair was too powerful, too connected, too rich, that women like me don't beat men like him. She paused. They were wrong. We beat him, not just in court, but in every life we've saved since. Every woman who escaped because of our foundation. Every child who grew up safe because we intervened. That's how we win, by refusing to give up. The crowd erupted in applause. After the gala, Grace, Jake, Connor, and David gathered at Grace's house. "Dad would be proud," Connor said. "He'd say we were just doing what Morrisons do," Jake replied. David raised his glass. "To Grandpa Morrison, who taught you to protect family, and to Mom, who taught me that surviving isn't enough. You have to thrive." They drank to family, to survival, to the legacy built from pain. Later, Grace stood on her porch, watching the sunset. Thomas came out, wrapped his arms around her. "Thinking about the past?" he asked. "Thinking about the future," Grace said. "David starts law school next year. The foundation is expanding to international work. We're just getting started. You've already done so much. It's not enough, not while women are still dying, not while children are still being used as weapons in custody battles, not while monsters like Marcus still exist." Thomas kissed her temple. "Then we keep fighting." "Always," Grace agreed. That night, Grace checked on David. He was 20 years old, but she still looked in on him sometimes. Old habits. He was awake, studying case law. "Mom," he said, "I found the transcript from your custody hearing." "Read the whole thing." Grace's stomach tightened. "And?" "I'm proud of you, for fighting, for refusing to give up even when the system failed you. I had help. Your uncles were amazing, but you were the one who kept going, who turned it all into something meaningful." David stood, hugged his mother. "I'm going to be a good lawyer, like Uncle Connor, like the lawyers who helped you. I'm going to make sure other kids don't lose their mothers to men like him." Grace held her son, the boy she'd almost lost, the man he'd become. "You already make me proud," she whispered. 5 years later, Grace Morrison gave her final public speech. She was 57. The foundation was thriving under new leadership. David was practicing family law, already making a difference. "Someone asked me recently if I forgave Marcus Sinclair," Grace said to the audience. "The answer is no. Forgiveness isn't required for healing. What's required is refusing to let the past define your future." She looked out at 2,000 faces, survivors all. "Marcus Sinclair tried to destroy me. He failed. Not because I'm special, but because I refused to believe his lies. I refused to accept that I was worthless, crazy, or alone. I fought, with every breath. with every ounce of strength. Grace smiled. And I won. We all won. Every woman in this room who survived, who escaped, who rebuilt, we won and will keep winning because we're stronger than the men who tried to break us. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. That night, Grace sat with her family, Thomas, David, Jake and his wife and children, Connor and his kids. No regrets? Jake asked quietly. Grace looked around the table, at the life she'd built, the family she'd created, the legacy she'd leave. Only one, she said. I wish I could tell Jennifer, Rebecca, and Melissa that he paid, that justice came, that they didn't die for nothing. They didn't, Connor said. Every woman you saved in their memory. Grace raised her glass. To Jennifer Hayes, Rebecca Cole, Melissa Grant, the women Marcus Sinclair destroyed. May their memory be a blessing and a warning. They drank to the dead and to the living. Grace Morrison lived 30 more years. She died at 87. Peacefully, surrounded by family, her obituary was simple. Grace Morrison, survivor, advocate, mother. She refused to let evil win. At her funeral, David spoke. My mother taught me that revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building a life so good, so meaningful, so full of love that their attempts to destroy you become irrelevant. He paused, composed himself. Marcus Sinclair is a footnote in history, a cautionary tale. But Grace Morrison, she's a legacy, a foundation that will help women for generations. A reminder that survival is possible, that justice exists, that good can triumph over evil. My mother won, not because he went to prison, but because she lived, fully, fearlessly, beautifully. That's the best revenge of all. The Morrison Foundation continues to this day, helping thousands of women annually. Funded by donations, staffed by survivors, Grace Morrison's name lives on, not as a victim, but as a warrior. And somewhere 3 women, Jennifer, Rebecca, and Melissa, rest easier knowing that the man who killed them paid, and that the woman who survived him changed the world.